field of psychology. For the last 30 plus years, I've been traveling the world in search of the strange and unusual. Everything from hunting for vampire legends in Transylvania, trying to capture the Loch Ness Monster, reports of crop circles, UFOs, alien abductions, really, really weird people. Yeah, well, I guess. Some creepy places. You name it, if it's just a little offbeat and odd, I've traveled the globe in search of the strange and bizarre. But what I discovered on my travels is that sometimes the weirdest things happen right in your own backyard. So that's what we're going to explore this afternoon. For the next 45 minutes or so, you can sit back and relax. I'll provide you everything you need to know. The background, the folklore, the eyewitness accounts. I'll talk a bit about my research at these places. Heck, I'll even provide you the directions to get to these places. But I'm going to leave it up to each and every one of you to travel to these places on your own and determine for yourself whether or not you believe these legends are true. So with that, let's explore some of the scariest stories that our state has to offer. And being that we're in Wisconsin, I'm legally obligated to start with the Haunted Supper Club. One of my favorites in Minocqua is the old Norwood Pines Supper Club. If you're looking for a classic, historic Wisconsin place, this is where you want to go. It was actually built in 1937 and immediately attracted all the end of Prohibition era gangsters that would come up from Illinois and spend their time up in the Northwoods. And it is thought that that has led to a lot of the activity inside this old supper club. Heavy chairs and stools will fall over or be tossed to the side as though thrown by some unseen force. Bartenders claim they've been tapped on the shoulder, names called out, but when they spin around, no one's there. Others have seen what appears to be a man dressed as a zoot suit gangster walking through the place and then vanishing right into a wall or right into thin air. He's been spotted so many times, people have called him Edgar. Now it's believed that Edgar actually rented a room at the supper club back when it was more of a brothel than a restaurant. And he fell in love with one of the ladies of the night that worked there, and she did not love him back, so instead he took a different way out and took a rope and took his life upstairs in his room at the end of that rope. And now many believe he forever haunts the place where his love was not returned from that woman of the lady of the night. Now, in fact, the place is thought to be cursed. The original owners got a divorce, and the wife thought she was going to get the property. She did not, so she cursed the place that anyone that ever owned it would be cursed with terrible luck. In fact, the recent owners told me when they were buying the place, the realtor said, you might not want to buy it. It's supposed to be haunted and cursed. Maybe it's not a good investment. But they're taking no chances. They leave out a drink every night on the bar. In case Edgar's spirit makes his way through, they'll have a nice little cocktail for him. But maybe haunted supper clubs aren't your thing. Maybe you like to get out and about where you're not in the safety of four walls around you. And for that, head down the road to Rib Lake, the old Rib Lake County Campground. Now this is a great campground because it provides you the opportunity to camp right next to the local cemetery. Now, of course, the cemetery is thought to be haunted as well. There are many variations of the story, but the main one tells of a young kid, whether it was a boy or a girl, walking or driving with family out in front of Lakeview Cemetery when they were in a car accident or struck by a car and they passed away, unfortunately. Now their spirit has been seen roaming throughout the cemetery, usually at night. But the opportunity to stay in the campground, where I said you can literally camp right next to the graveyard. You'll get a terrible sleep for two main reasons. One, all night long, carloads of teenagers go into the cemetery watching for the ghostly spirit. But also the legend tells that young child will make their way from the graveyard into the campground, walking through the ground, making sure to see who has the best fire, and then they'll sit around that fire all night. So if you're camping there, make sure your neighbors have a little better fire going than you do, so they'll terrorize your neighbors instead of you. But hauntings aren't the only stories we have here in our state. In fact, in Wisconsin, you can't throw a rock without hitting a place that has a tie to a mysterious creature attached to it. Now, believe it or not, in the 1800s, Wisconsin was the sea serpent capital of the world. In fact, we had so many legends of sea monsters, it was said that if you were a resort town in our state and you did not have a story of a sea serpent, you were behind the times. You were losing out on tourists coming from Illinois that wanted to go to a resort that had a sea serpent legend. One of my favorite sea serpent legends takes place on the Mississippi River. It's the Mississippi River Monster. In the 1800s, people were terrified of the Mississippi River because they believed there were giant monsters living in the depths of the river. Now, if you believe the old newspaper articles, these things were nearly 10 feet long, covered in a thick, scale-like armor that a bullet could not even pierce. Parents refused to allow their children to play down by the river because when they did, they thought they would be attacked by the giant man-eating fish in the river. The reason they believed this is that men were drowning, usually probably drunk, but when they would pull the bodies of these men out of the river, they found a lot of them had deep scratch marks or claw marks on their calves or ankles, as though something grabbed them and pulled them out to their watery graves. But if you follow the Mississippi River a little bit, you'll eventually hit Lake Pepin. It's a lake on the Mississippi River, dividing Wisconsin and Minnesota. They believe a monster is in the lake. In fact, the earliest indigenous reports tell that they would only take their strongest and sturdiest canoes out on the water because every time they capsized or drowned, they blamed it on this hideous monster. When the steamboat captains came up, they too started seeing these giant leviathan of the deep in the water. Newspapers started writing about it. Here we have one from the 1870s talking about the thing being somewhere between the size of a rhinoceros and an elephant in the waters of Lake Pepin. We have stories in the newspapers going back to the Civil War talking about a monster in Lake Pepin. In fact, it was so well known that noted author Laura Ingalls Wilder said she was born in a log house within 4 miles of the legend-haunted Lake Pepin. So many people have seen and heard the legend over the years that they finally have dubbed the creature Peppy, the lake monster of Lake Pepin. But don't let these cutesy postcards and t-shirts fool you. Many believe it's a deadly monster. Not only have people seen it, some believe they've captured photographic evidence of it. A few years ago, a man was out fishing with his buddy. He told me they saw what appeared to be a log moving upstream against the current of the river. They thought it was odd, so they motored their boat over there, and when they got there, they realized it wasn't a log at all. He snapped this photo of what he thought shows a long-necked, hump-like creature, and I apologize, laser pointers do not work on smart screens, but that he thought resembled the Loch Ness Monster. The thing descended back into the water, and he thought they had encountered the monster, Peppy, in the water. I've been on numerous expeditions to Lake Pepin, even lived on a houseboat for many days and nights with noted researcher Noah Voss, and you can see we had underwater cameras, we had sonar, fishing equipment, nets, Heck, we even jumped in using ourselves as bait, but luckily or unluckily, Pepe did not make an appearance. But the best part of this legend of Pepe is that the people of Lake City, Minnesota are so convinced Pepe is real, or at least convinced you'll come looking for it, they are now offering a $50,000 reward for the capture of the monster. As of today, nobody has collected the reward. And this weekend, if the weather improves, you could get there, capture Pepe, and be back $50,000 the richer. But maybe you like to stay on the presumed safety of dry land. And maybe you like to look up into the sky, look up at night, do some sense of seeing some UFO activity. Because not only do we have the UFO capital of the world in our state, we actually have 3 of them. The towns of Bellevue, Dundee, and Elmwood all claim to be the UFO capital of the entire world. They all have UFO Day festivals. You can go there and get an alien burger and partake in all of the fun. But we have these capitals for good reason. We have a lot of weird stories. Now this next UFO legend might be the weirdest one you will ever hear about. It happened not too far down the road in Eagle River, Wisconsin. 1961. Happened to this gentleman, Joe Simonton. He was a plumber and a part-time farmer. Welcome, folks. He was having a late breakfast one morning when all of a sudden he peeked out his window and he noticed this craft descending into his yard. He said it was about 30 feet wide, had all these little muffler rings or circles on them, about 12 feet high. Now, Simonton had never given much thought to UFOs, so he wasn't spooked, he was curious. Much to his credit, he walked out to see this thing hovering in his yard. And when he did, an opening appeared on the craft. He said, like the trunk of your car popping open, and out to the front came one of the inhabitants. The pilot, the human, the alien, whatever it was. Simonton could see 2 more identical beings inside. They were all dressed the same in a weird spandex-like outfits, and they were all identical, very short, with dark hair, dark skin, and dark eyes. Simonton said they reminded him of small Italian men running around. It'll get weirder, don't worry. So Simonton realizes that they have a jug, and without any verbal communication, he realized that they wanted water for that jug. So he went to his house and pumped some water. When he came back, he looked inside the craft and he could see one of the other beings was cooking something over a flameless grill or some apparatus. Trying to get some communication going, Simonton motioned like eating. Are you eating that? Is that what you're going to eat? The leader recognized his interest and traded Simonton, taking the water and giving Simonton what they were cooking, which the media labeled as pancakes from outer space. They told you this was going to be weird. So they gave Simonton a couple of these pancakes. He ate one of them and said it was the worst tasting pancake he'd ever had. He said, no wonder these guys are so small. If this is what they're eating, I feel bad for them. So he made the exchange, and then the craft just shut the door and flew off out of sight. Simonton had no idea that while he was exchanging pancakes with UFO occupants, people were calling in around the area about seeing a UFO in the vicinity of his farm. He didn't want to make any mention of the story, but a reporter overheard him telling a friend about it, and you can imagine the amount of publicity that arrived at his place, because as soon as the craft left, he was bombarded by people coming to his farm. Within the first week, over 1,000 people showed up at his farm looking for those UFO pancakes. The government actually sent Dr. J. Allen Hynek from Project Blue Book up from Illinois to interview Simonton about his story. And they believed he was credible, sincere, and didn't embellish his story, but they thought he had just kind of gone stir crazy in his farm by himself and had a walking dream about pancakes that he was making for breakfast. But until the day he died, Simonton believed he had encountered something not of this earth. And he's not alone. People have all sorts of weird experiences in our state. Is anyone here from Stevens Point? No? Good. You won't have to worry about avoiding this next place, because this next place is called Highway 66. Except the locals, they don't call it that. They call this place Bloody Bride Bridge. Legend is, many years ago, while coming home on her wedding night, a young woman was involved in a car accident on this very bridge, where she bled to death waiting for help to arrive. Immediately, stories started circulating about this woman on the bridge, this bloody bride, that people passing over the bridge would see what appeared to be a woman in a bloody bridal gown walking and vanishing right before their eyes. It was said that one of the first witnesses was a law enforcement officer. Driving over the bridge at night, when out of nowhere, a woman in a bridal gown was right in front of his vehicle. So he slammed on the brakes, braced for impact, came to a screeching halt, and when he got out to see the damage, if you will, he realized there was no one there. No damage to the vehicle, no body or otherwise. But he was so convinced he had run over a flesh and blood person, he spent the next 20 minutes or so scouring the area looking for that woman. Of course, he never found her, and he left the area convinced that he had seen the bloody bride of the bridge. But the story gets even better. Lots of times dares spring up around these locations. People dare one another to do things in order for the legend to come true. One of the dares at Bloody Bride Bridge is that if you park your car on the bridge and turn it off, when you do and look into your back mirror, not only will you see the ghost of the bloody bride, but many witnesses told me that she was actually sitting right in their back seat when they took the dare. Now, luckily or unluckily for me, the dozen or so times I've waited for her, she has not appeared in my vehicle, but if you're going to take this dare, be very careful. This is a very busy road, a lot of traffic day and night on this bridge. So if you're going to do the dare, be extra cautious. I would hate to have to put you in my next program as another casualty of Bloody Bride Bridge. But when it comes to hauntings, I get asked one question more than any other combined. And that question from people is this: where can I go to spend the night in a haunted place? Well, if you have that macabre sense of adventure, you're in luck. As you saw, we have campgrounds, hotels, motels, B&Bs, resorts, all with a haunted reputation. If you're looking for a little weekend away, a little staycation, I highly recommend you head to one of my favorite hotels in Wisconsin. In Milwaukee, the old Pfister Hotel. Now, this is a gorgeous, upscale hotel. You will absolutely love staying here. It's top shelf when you stay here. In fact, it is such a nice hotel that they brag that every single president since McKinley has stayed in that hotel while they've been in Wisconsin. But I know what you're thinking. How fun can it be? McKinley looks like he's having a terrible time there. But remember, in the 1970s, royalty stayed there as well when the king himself made an appearance at the Pfister Hotel, giving it a much more cool factor than McKinley. The place is so amazing that Mr. Pfister himself refuses to leave, even though he's been dead for nearly 100 years. Many people will see his spirit walking down the hallways on the floors. He's always walking through the place, looks like he's walking like he owns the place. Well, if it is his ghost, he does own the place, or at least he once did. People will see him vanish into a wall or simply just disappear like he was never there. When he was alive, he always loved having dogs with him, which is why so many staff members told me they have trouble with phantom dogs inside the hotel. They'll often get calls down to the front desk from a room saying, "The people next to me are letting their dog bark all night." Staff will go up to the room, find it empty, unrented, no dog in there, alive or otherwise. They also have trouble with all of their artwork in the hotel. They'll come in, it'll be off kilter, they'll fix it, come back, it'll be askew again, as though somebody is playing tricks on them, making sure they're keeping up with their duties. You might have heard of this hotel recently. It made international news lately because this is the hotel where all the teams that come in to play the Milwaukee Brewers, this is where they stay while they're in town. Or I should say, this is where they used to stay. Too many of them now will get their own Airbnb because they're afraid of all the ghostly activity at the hotel and they're too scared to stay there. I think we should force them to stay there, give the Brewers any help that they can get. But when I talk about mysterious creatures, probably the first thing you think of is that of Bigfoot. Known throughout the world as the Bigfoot, the Yeti, the Yowie, the Sasquatch. Many people think of these creatures. They often think of the heavily forested northwestern states. They don't often think of the Midwest. But here in Wisconsin, I receive dozens and dozens of reports every single year. Some of them are your traditional Bigfoot, and some are a little bit different, like this one. This is the tiny town of Steinthal, Wisconsin. Don't worry if you've never heard of it. It's practically a ghost town today. Nothing exists there anymore. But back in the 1970s and 80s, this was the paranormal hotspot of Wisconsin. Mainly in part to this old abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Teenagers and college-age kids thought it was haunted, so they'd go out there, and it was just far enough from the main road to be away from the prying eyes of law enforcement or their parents. So they'd go out there and claim that when they got there, they would see mysterious lights moving through the house as though somebody was inside. But they'd go in completely empty. Or they'd show up and start going in and they'd hear voices of people talking, thinking other legend trippers are inside. But as soon as they walked in, they realized it was empty except for this creepy doll that they put up to scare one another when they got in there. But so many people started coming from all over the region to see this haunted house that they started spreading out onto the land, exploring the area. At the time, the house was surrounded by marshy wetlands, which you can kind of see here from this grainy newspaper photo of the time. That's when people started seeing a giant Bigfoot-like creature in the woods. And even though physically it looked like a Bigfoot, the same 6 to 8 feet tall, very broad, heavily muscled, but this one was a little bit different because this one was said to have glowing green eyes. And when I say eyes, I mean eyes, 3 of them to be exact. In fact, they had no idea what to call this thing, so they started calling it the Steinthal thing. Eventually what would happen is people would show up to the old Steinthal Tavern on the corner here, which is right where this religious chapel is today, because right across the street they would sit out on the bar with their spirits, and across the street this thing would often appear right by the old mill where my colleague Kevin Nelson is standing. But here's the interesting part. I've spoken with the last remaining residents of Steinthal, and there are no known recent sightings of the beast. So it begs the question of, was it ever there? Is it still there? Did it migrate off somewhere else? I'll leave it up to you to go to Steinthal and decide for yourself. But if you thought these early stories were weird, and granted they were, these next stories are going to be beyond bizarre. Now, earlier in the program, in the introduction, you saw I spent some time over in Romania, in Transylvania, looking for vampires. Little did I know I should have stayed right here in Wisconsin. Well, Mineral Point, that is. In the 1980s, Mineral Point seemed to be overrun with vampire legends. It all began late one night when the police officer on your right here, John Pepper, was patrolling. It was late at night. He passed by the old Graceland Cemetery when he saw what he reported to be a very tall, very pale, very thin very ugly vampire, complete with a cape on him. Officer Pepper gave chase to this vampire, and he said it easily jumped over a fence and disappeared into the night. Now, he was on duty. He didn't want to report it, but he was on duty, so he had to make the report. And you can imagine the very next day, media from all over the world descended upon Mineral Point looking for the Mineral Point vampire. It got to be so much, Officer Pepper quit that police force, moved away, and refused to talk about the case ever again. But as soon as the story broke, dozens of people were calling in saying that vampires were jumping out of every nook and cranny in Mineral Point. Now, I don't know if the police chief believed the story or whether he was having fun with the semantics, because in the last paragraph, he said that he was offering overtime to any of his officers who would stake out the place, but none of them would bite on his offer. I still get reports of people claiming that the vampires are still there. I've been to the cemetery day and night, summer, winter, every season, and luckily I've never been attacked by a vampire, but then again, I have my vampire hunting kit with me, just in case you might want to grab one for yourself as well. Pardon me. Perhaps the best known creature in Wisconsin, thanks to my good friend and colleague, the late Linda Godfrey, is now known as the Beast of Bray Road, Wisconsin's werewolf-like creature. It all began back in the late 1980s when Linda was working as a journalist in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, southeastern portion of the state. She started receiving reports of people talking about Bray Road being cursed with some weird monstrosity out there. People would be driving down the road, usually at night, but not always, when all of a sudden, for a lack of a better term, they would see what appeared to be a werewolf on the side of the road. Anywhere from 5 to 8 feet tall, covered in this thick matted down fur with the huge fangs and the pointed ears and the snout. Sometimes people even saw it eating roadkill or freshly killed prey on the side of the road. But the good news is that outside of charging at a couple vehicles, the creatures seem to be more likely to just scurry back into the underbrush and try to remain undetected, which is good for you because that means if you go out to Bray Road hunting for them, most likely you're not going to die. Well, 50-50, but still pretty good odds when you're out chasing for werewolves on the road. Every October, Elkhorn has a Beast Fest that you can go and get a private tour on a trolley and Bray Road, and so far we've had no one that we've lost. Everybody has made it back, so that's a lot of fun. This next legend is so bizarre, you're going to think, is that the plot for a 1950s drive-in horror movie? It is just so weird. Every community seems to have that people don't want to go down. They want to avoid it at all costs. And if you're from the New London area of the state, you would know this road as Marsh Road, aptly named because it is covered by marshland on each side of the road. The stories go back into at least the 1950s. They may predate that, but that's as far back as I've tracked eyewitness accounts. And the stories are very odd in the fact that the road itself is said to be alive. That you drive down the road in one direction, it'll be a certain mileage. Turn around and drive back, it'll be a different mileage, as though the road has expanded or contracted on you. People have all sorts of troubles with their vehicles out there. Brand new cars will have mechanical issues. Batteries will die out. You'll need to be jumped or towed out of the area. And for good reason, because the main story also dates back to the 1950s. And it tells that in town, during October, there was a homecoming festival at the high school. After the king and queen were voted, the royalty decided to go out to Marsh Road to celebrate. But they weren't going out there to get to know one another. They were going out there in a suicide pact taking their lives at the end of a rope. And now it is said when you go out there, especially during October, you will see the nooses, the phantom nooses hanging from the trees and vanish right before your eyes. Others claim to see the ghostly spirits of that king and queen walking down the road like they're extras from a zombie movie and then vanishing right into thin air. But don't worry, the legend gets even better than this, because dating back to the same 1950s period, unsuspecting motorists have been driving down the road when all of a sudden they see something that shouldn't be there, something that couldn't be there, but yet there it is staring right back at them. So what are these people seeing? Well, maybe I better let you just take a look. The goat man of Marsh Road. Half goat, half human. Now, which half is which depends on who you speak with. In a more sinister version of events, it wasn't the suicide that did in the homecoming king and queen, it was the goat man. And that when the authorities showed up and realized the bodies were all scattered and half devoured, they concocted the legend of the suicide so panic would not ensue. But whether or not you believe in hauntings or the goat man, I can tell you from personal experience, when you're out on the road at midnight by yourself walking down the gravel, every little nook or every little snap or branch breaking in the woods is going to have your mind conjuring up images of that goat man. And if you're like most people, you'll probably make your pace a little bit quicker. But the interesting part of this legend is we have no documentation of any kids dying out on that road, whether it was by their own hand or by a goat man. You would think if some popular high school kids did in fact end their lives out there, it would have made the newspaper at the very least, but still a strange story while you're out there. None of that seems to matter. Now today, one of the most popular things for people to enjoy is that of true crime stories, whether you like the podcast, the 48 hours, whatever on TV, the movies, the shows, what be it. So I love throwing this case in because it's one of my favorites that I've ever researched. In fact, it's one of the first stories I ever began looking into. A beautiful nature area. One night, two men were sitting there. Don't worry, there's nothing to see in this photo. They were just sitting there one night, just enjoying the beauty of the area, when one of them turned around and where the arrow's pointing, he noticed what appeared to be a glowing woman in white standing right behind him. So he nudged his buddy and said, "Hey, do you know there's a glowing woman right behind us?" His buddy said, "Yes, but I'm too afraid to turn around and look." About 15 minutes later, they got the collective courage to turn around, and the ghost was gone, the woman was gone. So were they. They took off, hightailed it out of there. Now, the only way to get out of there is to either run back uphill through the woods in the darkness to the parking lot, or jump into the river and get away that way. And they ran back up. One of them was so frightened, he refused to bring me back there to show me where the event took place. The other one did. And at the time, I was a UW Stout student in their psychology program. And one of the cohorts in my program was a young man by the name of Aaron. He believed he was psychic. He could pick up these spirits. So I brought him with, and Aaron and I wanted to take a photograph of each other where the two men would have been sitting that night. But you can see here his camera malfunctioned. It was working properly earlier. It worked later, but he was unable to take my photo. My camera did take a photo. I didn't notice anything, but when we had the film developed, this was back when people actually used film, you'll notice what appears to be some mist or fog or something right where the two men would have seen that woman standing there. So I thought this was interesting, so I started talking about this case at all sorts of conferences. And after one lecture, a gentleman came up to me and said, "Chad, I lived out there in the 1970s. There was a murder out there, but that's all he remembered, that's all he could tell me." So I started flipping through the local newspaper archives. It started at 1970 and went day by day. Unfortunately, by the time I hit 1974, I realized the man was right. There was a murder out there. A young woman had been killed out at Elk Lake. But it wasn't just any nameless, faceless young woman. It was this young woman, Mary Chalace. Now, Mary had been hitchhiking from Minneapolis to Chicago. She was last seen being picked up on the side of the road by this gentleman who was last seen kicking dirt and leaves over something by Elk Lake Dam, not too far away. And it was very rural, very secluded, so neighbors that caught a glimpse of this thought it was odd. So they called the police, and by the time the police got there, the body of the man was gone, the car was gone, but the witness guy, he was gone, but Mary was there. She had been stabbed to death. And even though they had a witness description of the guy, he was never captured and the case went unsolved. For decades, it was a cold case. Well, now I decided to go back. If the place was haunted, maybe it was haunted by this murder victim. So I brought Aaron the psychic with me again, and he wanted me to take a photo of this pillar, which I did. I took dozens that night. And then the only one out of the ordinary is, again, this roaming mist or fog that I didn't see with the naked eye. But as we were leaving, Aaron believed that the spirit of this young woman was going to follow us back to campus. So we decided to take one last photograph, and you can decide whether she was following us back, because when the film came back, again, this is what appeared on the film. And again, probably some mist or fog, who knows. And we used to send these photos into Kodak or Fuji, depending on what film we were using, and we just wondering, whether it was a light leak, a developmental error, double exposure, and we'd always get a form letter back saying, we looked at the photo and there's nothing wrong with it. We're sorry it ruined your film. Here are free couple rolls of film. Thanks for using Kodak or Fuji. But what this shows you is I can't tell you what you're seeing here this evening, but according to the experts, it's not that laundry list of things that I mentioned. But we didn't know it at the time, but you could write an entire book about this Elk Lake Dam area. From a father and son serial killer team living up on the hill to phantom apparitions and hitchhikers on the bridge, possession out there, some suicides, all sorts of activity. The good news is that so many people have heard about this story, so many media outlets have covered it, that a few years back the Dunn County Sheriff's Department reopened the case looking for her murderer. They even dug up her body looking for DNA evidence that they did not find. But this case is near and dear to me because it's one of the first I started researching, and it's probably the one I've spoken about the most over the last 30 years. In the last 30 years, I've probably talked about this case several hundred times, maybe 1,000 times. So you can imagine my surprise when 2 years ago, 50 years after her death, they caught her murderer. He was living in Minnesota, and they caught him through DNA at the stocking cap left behind at the murder scene. And he admitted that it was a sexual advance gone wrong. She did not want his advances, and he ended up taking her life. He is now in prison. He pled guilty, and he's sitting in prison, 84, so he'd be 86 now. And that, to me, is what folklore is about. Not just stories of monsters and UFOs, but stories of us as a people, as a culture, and what these values mean to us. But I love true crime, but sometimes it gets a little too true and a little too much crime, which is why I've saved this legend for last, because this is a warning that this story can get a little bit spooky. This story can get a little bit graphic or gruesome or gory. So at any point during the last few minutes of our lecture, if you think to yourself, nope, this isn't really my cup of tea, feel free, get up, go home, throw on a Hallmark Christmas movie, cleanse your palate, I will not be offended. Those of you foolish enough to stick around, let's begin. In the 1800s, Wisconsin was no different from the rest of the world. We were dealing with the plague of grave robbers, body snatchers, resurrectionists as they were called, people that would dig up the freshly deceased remains of people and then usually sell them to medical facilities or colleges where they could be experimented on and autopsies could be performed. But luckily by the 1900s, this was long in our past. We didn't have to worry about it at all. Well, maybe not quite so quick. Anyone recognize this gentleman? Ed Gein, very good, the butcher of Plainfield, Wisconsin. Now, forget what you saw with the Netflix series about Ed Gein. If you forgot Ed's story, you might recall some of the movies they based on him, including Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Silence of the Lambs, and many, many, many others. Now, most people just remember Ed as a killer, and true he was, but before he was captured in Plainfield, he was well liked. He would babysit for kids. He would bring over his neighbors what he called a venison stew for them to eat. One neighbor told me he remembered his mother getting this stew. It had such a horrible stench to it that she threw it away, which was good because even though Ed was a murderer, his real passion was to wait until it got dark. Then for nearly a decade, he would fire up his vehicle, head down to the nearby cemeteries, where he would dig up the remains of women that reminded him of his own deceased mother. Yeah, my thoughts exactly. I told you this was going to be gruesome. He then would bring those remains back to his farmhouse where he lived in squalor. Here's a detective inside his home. Ed would use those remains to make furniture, lampshades. He even had skulls that he used as cereal bowls and candle holders. And I won't even get into his bedroom antics with some of these bodies. And they found skulls everywhere. And when Ed really got a bug in his system, what he would do is make an entire outfit of this material, and he would wear it like a demented Halloween costume as he danced under the moonlight in his front yard. But you see, back in 1957, when we finally caught Gein and discovered how truly evil his crimes were, they wanted to open his house as a roadside attraction, a museum of horrors that you could pay to go see. But before they were able to do so, thankfully, it mysteriously burned to the ground. Townsfolk torched it allegedly, all of it gone. But even though Ed's buildings are gone and Ed's no longer among the living, many believe he has forever cursed Plainfield with his horrific deeds. And maybe they're right. There are a lot of haunted places attached to Ed, including many of the cemeteries where he did his grave robbing. Many people will go out there and they'll report seeing what appears to be a man digging a grave by hand, no backhoe. And they thought that was curious. They'd walk over and find the man was gone, no fresh grave, no dirt, nothing disturbed at all, as though the man wasn't even there. Others have weird experiences at Ed's gravesite. Notice I didn't say his gravestone because that's gone. People kept stealing it, so they never replaced it. But he's right between his family with his mother there on his side. And people will hear the sounds of women screaming, thinking it's Gein's victims while they're there. Others will go to the old Warden hardware store where he killed Mrs. Warden. For many years, this was a working hardware store. They since have moved to a bigger building on the outskirts of Plainfield. But when it was operating, staff members would see things fly on their own. Things would go missing for months on end. People would see an apparition of a woman walking into a wall and vanishing. All sorts of weird things. Last time I was there, the building was for sale if you're looking to own a piece of Wisconsin's grisly history. But by far the most, I don't want to say popular, the most common place people want to go in Plainfield is the land of Ed's old farm estate. And as you saw, none of the buildings are there, but the land still is there. Those who do believe that it's haunted by Ed and his victims. Many will go there and see what appears to be Eddie himself, his spirit walking along the land. Others will hear the ghostly cries of women out on the land, thought to be his victims out there. But if you're going to go there, don't do it on Halloween. You'll probably get more of a trespassing ticket than that of a ghostly encounter. But as I'm running low on time, here's what I hope you take from tonight's program. The overwhelming majority of people who contact me about experiencing one of these things, they're not out actively looking for it. They're not out hunting for it. They're just going about their day-to-day lives when something weird happens to them. Like, I don't know, maybe leaving the library one night after a program, when all of a sudden something strange and bizarre occurs to them. So I want you all to keep an eye out, because you never know when you might be the next to experience one of these legends. And if you want more information, my website, Chad Lewis Research, has more than you could ever want or need. But don't let your adventure end here tonight. Grab one of my books, go on your own adventure of Wisconsin. And when you do, I think you'll discover that we live in one heck of a weird state. And I mean that in a good way. You're going to see things you've never seen, you'll meet some odd people, and along the way you might just discover that the strangest thing out there is often yourself. So with that, I will stick around if you have questions or would like to tell me a story in private. Ask a story as well. Make sure you stop back to my table, grab as many free postcards from me as you want. You can terrorize your enemies because my photos are on the postcards. But again, I want to thank the library for putting this together. How great you can come to a program like this at no cost. You can check out a wealth of information from the library, a real treasure for the community. So if you like programs like this one, let them know so you get more of these.
Yes, please.
If you didn't like this program, let them know so you get fewer of these. But
Please don't.
either way, they put a ton of work into getting me here tonight. They should be applauded, and thank you all for coming. Thank you.